Hello everyone. Today we will discuss chapter 25, transformation of the ancient phase. Transformation of the ancient phase. Social crisis and the origin of land grants. The central factor that ultimately transformed the ancient Indian society into medieval society was the practice of land grants. Why did this practice originate? The charters say that the givers, mainly kings, wanted to acquire religious merit, and the receivers, mainly monks and priests, needed means for performing religious rites. But the practice really came into being because of a serious crisis that affected the ancient social order. The Varna society was based on the producing activities of the peasants, who were called Vaishyas, and of the laborers, who were called Shudras. The taxes collected by the loyal officers from the Vaishyas enabled the kings to pay salaries to their officials and soldiers, reward their priests, and purchase luxury and other articles from the merchants and big artisans. But in the 3rd to 4th centuries AD, a deep social crisis afflicted this system. Contemporary Puranic texts complain of a situation in which Varnas or social classes discarded the functions assigned to them. The lower orders attempted to arrogate to themselves the status and functions of the higher orders. In other words, they refused to pay taxes and render labor services. This led to the Varna Samgara, or intermixture of social classes. Varna barriers were attacked because the producing masses were oppressed with the heavy taxes and impositions and were denied protection by the kings. This state of affairs is known as Kali Yuga. In the Puranic passages of the 3rd to 4th centuries AD, several measures were adopted to overcome the crisis. The almost contemporary law book of Manu advises that the Vaishyas and Shudras should not be allowed to deviate from their duties. This may have led to coercive measures, but a more important step to meet the situation was to grant land to priests and officials in lieu of salaries and remuneration. Such a practice had the advantages of throwing the burden of collecting taxes and maintaining law and order in the donated areas on the beneficiaries. They could deal with the recalcitrant peasants on the spot. The practice could also bring new lands under cultivation. Moreover, by implanting Brahmanas in the conquered tribal areas, the tribal people could be taught the Brahmanical way of life and the need of obeying the king and paying taxes to him. Decline of central control. Land grants became frequent from the 5th century AD. According to this, the Brahmanas were granted lands, villages free from taxes. All the taxes which were collected by the king from the villages were transferred to the Brahmanas. In addition to these beneficiaries, in addition to this, the beneficiaries were given the right to govern the people living in the donated villages. Government officials and royal retainers were not permitted to enter the gift villages. Up to the 5th century AD, the ruler generally retained the right to punish the thieves, but in later times, the beneficiaries were authorized to punish all criminal offenders. So the Brahmanas not only collected taxes from the peasants and artisans, but also maintained law and order in the villages granted to them. Villages were granted to the Brahmanas forever, so that the power of the king was heavily undermined from the end of the Gupta period. In the Maurya period, taxes were assessed and collected by the agents of the king, and the law and order were maintained by them. But as a result of land grants, there sprang up many pockets which were free from royal control. Royal control was further eroded through the payment of government officials by land grants. In the Maurya period, the officers of the state, from the highest to the lowest, were generally paid in cash. The practice continued under the Kushans, who issued large number of copper and gold coins. and it lingered under the Guptas. But from the 6th century AD, the position seems to have changed. The law books of that century recommends that services should be rewarded in land. Accordingly, from the time of Harshavardhana, public officials were paid in land revenues. In a fourth of the royal revenue was earmarked for the endowment of great public servants. The governors, ministers, magistrates, and officers were given a portion of land for their personal upkeep. All this created vested interest at the cost of royal authority. New agrarian economy. We notice an important change in the agrarian economy. Landed beneficiaries could not cultivate lands by themselves, nor could they collect revenues by themselves. The actual cultivation was entrusted to peasants or sharecroppers who were attached to the land but did not legally own it. The Chinese pilgrim Itzing states that most Indian monasteries got their lands cultivated by the servants and others. The Huan Sang describes the Shudras as agriculturalists, which suggests that they no longer cultivated land mainly as slaves and agricultural laborers. They possibly occupied it temporarily. This evidently happened in the old settled areas in North India. When villages were granted in the tribal areas, the agriculturalists were placed under the control of religious beneficiaries, especially the Brahmanas, because the Brahmanas began to be granted land on a large scale from the 5th to 6th centuries. From the 6th century onwards, sharecroppers and peasants were particularly asked to stick to the land granted to the beneficiaries in the backward and mountainous areas such as Orissa, Deccan, etc. From there, the practice spread to the basin of the Ganga. In the North India, also artisans and peasants were asked not to leave the villages granted to the beneficiaries, so they could not move from one village to another. On the other hand, they had to live in the same village to cater to its all possible needs. Decline of trade and town. Decline of trade and town. From the 6th century AD, trade began to decline. Trade with the western part of the Roman Empire ended in the 3rd century, and silk trade with Iran and Byzantium stopped in the middle of the 6th century. India carried on some commerce with China and Southeast Asia, but its benefits were reaped by the Arabs who acted as middlemen. In the pre-Muslim period, the Arabs practically monopolized the export trade of India. The decline of trade for well over 300 years after the 6th century is strikingly demonstrated by the practical absence of gold coins in the country. The paucity of coins after the 6th century is true not only of North India but also of South India. The decline of trade led to the decay of towns. Towns flourished in the West and North India under the Kushans. Shatavahanas and Kushans. A few cities continued to thrive in Gupta times, but the post-Gupta period witnessed the ruin of many old commercial cities in North India. Excavations show that several towns in Haryana and East Punjab, Purana Khila, Delhi, Mathura, Hastinapur, Meerut district, Shravasti, Uttar Pradesh, Kaushambi near Allahabad, Rajghat, Varanasi, Chirant, Saran district, Vaishali and Pataliputra began to decline in the Gupta period and mostly disappeared in the post-Gupta times. The Chinese pilgrim Huansang visited several towns considered sacred on account of their association with the Buddha, but found them almost deserted or dilapidated on account of restricted market for Indian exports. Artisans and merchants living in these towns flocked to the countryside and took to cultivation. In the late 5th century, a group of silk weavers from the western coast migrated to Mandsaur in Malwa, gave up silk weaving and adopted other professions. On account of the decay of trade and towns, the villagers had to meet their needs in respect of oil, salt, spices, cloth, etc. by all themselves. So This gave rise to smaller units of production, each unit meeting its own needs. From the 6th century AD onwards, some changes occurred in the social organization. In the Gangetic Basin in North India, the Vaishyas were regarded as free peasants, but the land grants created landlords between the peasants on the one hand and the king on the other, so that the Vaishyas became a good so that Vaishyas became as good as the Shudras. In this way, the old Brahmanical order was modified. This modified social order spread from the North India into Bengal and South India as a result of land grants to the Brahmanas brought from the north from the 5th to 6th centuries. In the outlying areas, we find mainly two orders, the Brahmanas and the Shudras. Changes in the Varna system. Frequent seizures of power and land grants gave rise to several categories of landed people. When a person acquired land and power, he naturally sought a high position in society. He might belong to the lower Varna, but he might be favored is generous favored with generous land grants by his master. This created difficulties because though economically well off, socially he was low. According to Dharma Sutras, social positions hitherto were mainly regulated by the Varna system. The people were divided into four Varnas, the Brahmanas being the highest and the Shudras being the lowest. The economic rights of a person were also determined by the Varna to which he belonged. So, some changes had to be made in the written text to recognize the position of the new landed classes. An astrologer called Varahamira, who belonged to the 6th century, prescribed houses in sizes varying according to the Varna, as was the old practice. But he also fixed the size according to the grades of various classes of ruling chiefs. Thus, formerly all things in society were graded according to the Varnas, but now they also came to be determined according to the landed possessions of a person. From the 7th century onwards, numerous castes were created. A Purana of the 8th century states that the thousands of mixed castes were produced by the connection of Vaishya women with men of lower castes. This implies that the Shudras and untouchables were divided into countless subcastes. So were the Brahmanas and the Rajputs were appeared as an important factor in the Indian polity and society around the 7th century. The number of castes increased on account of the nature of the economy in which people could not move from one place to another. Although people living in different areas followed the same occupation, they became divided into subcastes according to the territory to which they belonged. In addition to this, many tribal peoples were admitted into Hindu society because of the land grants given to the Brahmanas in the aboriginal tracts. Most of these peoples were enrolled as Shudras and mixed caste. Every tribe was now given the status of a separate caste in Hindu society. Cultural developments in about the 6th to 7th century started the formation of a subnational units such as Andhra, Assam, Bengal, Gujarat, Karnataka, Maharashtra, Orissa, Rajasthan, Tamil Nadu, etc. The identity of subnational groups is recognized by both foreign and Indian sources. The Chinese traveler Huan Sang mentions several nationalities. Vishagadatta, an author of about the 6th century AD, speaks of the different regions inhabited by peoples different in customs, clothing, and language. The Jaina books of the late 8th century notice the existence of 18 major peoples of or nationalities. It describes the physical features of 16. It produces samples of their language and says something about their character. The 6th to 7th centuries are equally important in the history of Sanskrit literature. Sanskrit continued to be used by the ruling class from about the 2nd century AD. As the rulers came to live in pomp and splendor, the style of their language became verbose and ornate. The ornate style in Sanskrit prose and poetry became common from the 7th century, and the traditional Sanskrit Pandits still love, love to write in it. The best example of the verbiage in prose is found in the writings of Bana. Although the prose of Bana was not easy to imitate, it continued to serve as a model for Sanskrit writers in the medieval period. From the 7th century AD, we also notice a remarkable development in the linguistic history of India. Buddhist teaching writings from eastern India show the faint beginnings of Bengali, Assamese, Maithili, Oriya, and Hindi. Similarly, the Jaina Prakrit works of the same period show the beginning of Gujarati and Rajasthani. It seems that each region came to develop its own language on account of its isolation from the others. On the breakup of the Gupta Empire, there arose several independent principalities which naturally hindered countrywide contacts and communications. The decline of trade meant lack of communication between the various regions, and this promoted the growth of regional languages. Regional scripts became more prominent from the 7th century AD. From Maurya to Gupta times, although the script underwent changes, more or less the same script continued to obtain throughout the country. Thus, a person who has mastered the script of the Gupta age can read inscriptions from different parts of the country in that period. But from the 7th century, every region came to have its own script, and hence nobody can read Gupta inscriptions found in different parts of the country unless he learns several scripts. Bhakti and Tantricism. In sculpture and construction of temples, every region came to evolve its own style from the 7th to 8th centuries, particularly South India, tended to become the land of stone temples. Stone and bronze were, were the two main media in which divinities were represented. Bronze statues began to be manufactured on a impressive large scale. Although found they are also found in good numbers in Himalayan territories, and they predominated in South India because of their use in Brahminical temples, and Eastern India because of their use in Buddhist temples and monasteries. Although the same gods and goddesses were worshipped throughout the country, people of every region portrayed them in sculptures in their own way. We also notice some religious changes in the post Gupta times. Hindu divinities came to be arranged according to their grades in the hierarchy, just as society was divided into unequal classes based on the ritual, landed property, military power, etc. So the divinities were also divided into unequal ranks. Vishnu, Shiva, and Durga appeared as supreme deities, presiding over many other gods and goddesses who were placed in lower positions as retainers and attendants. Especially the Supreme Mother, goddess, was represented in a dominating posture in relation to the several minor deities. This was reflected in both art and literature. The monastic organization of the Jainas, Shaivites, Vaishnavites, etc., also came to be divided into about five ranks. The highest rank was occupied by Acharya, whose coronation took place in the same manner as the coronation of a prince. From the 7th century AD, the Bhakti cult spread throughout the country, and especially in the south. Bhakti meant that the people made all kinds of offerings to the god in return for which they received the prasada or the favor of the god. It meant that the devotees completely surrendered to their god. This practice can be compared to the complete dependence of the tenants on the landowners. But just as the tenants offered and rendered various services to the Lord and then received land and protection as a kind of favor from him, a similar relation came to be established between the individual and his God. The most remarkable development in the religious field in India from about the 6th century AD was the spread of Tantricism. In the 5th to 6th centuries, many Brahmanas received land in Nepal, Assam, Bengal, Orissa, Central India, and the Deccan. And it is about this time that the Tantric texts shrines, and practices also appeared. Tantricism admitted both women and Shudras into its ranks and laid great stress on the use of magical rituals. Some of the rituals may have been in use in earlier times, but they were systematized and recorded in the tantric text from about the 6th century AD. They were intended to satisfy the material desires of the devotees for physical possessions and to cure the day-to-day diseases and injuries. Obviously, Tantricism arose as a result of the large-scale admission of the Aboriginal peoples in the Brahminical society. The Brahmanas adopted many of the tribal rituals and charms, which were now officially compiled, sponsored, and fostered by them. In course of time, they were distorted by the Brahmanas and priests to serve the interest of their rich clients. Tantricism permeated Jainism, Buddhism, Shaivism, and Vaishnavism. From the 7th century, it continued to hold many ground throughout the medieval age. Many medieval manuscripts found in the different parts of the country deal with Tantricism and astrology, and the two are compiled completely mixed with each other. Thus, in the 6th and 7th centuries, we notice certain striking developments in polity, society, economy, language, script, and religion. This shows that in this period, ancient India was coming to an end and medieval India was taking shape. Okay, we have completed chapter 25. In the next video, we will discuss chapter 26, sequence of social changes. So thank you for listening me. We'll see you in next class. Thank you very much.